Mr. Governor, normally we don't take questions on this COVID version of the communicated presentation, but a couple of people have sent in some questions. May I crave the Governor's indulgence to read them out so we can take them? Thank you.
Thank you. You can read, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. The first set of questions come from Nancy Ido-Naji of Moneyline on AIT. He says, how do you assess the fear of global recession and how this will impact the Nigerian economy? That's our first question. The second one says, we have read in some reports that Nigeria's GDP will contract by almost 8%. How true is this? And what is CBN doing to ameliorate this impact on Nigerians? Her third question goes, how much of oil drop will be digestible and indigestible to deal with this pandemic shock that will impact FX? I hope that is clear. The other question comes from Tope Alake from Bloomberg. It says, we would like to know how CBN is meeting FX demand of manufacturers. They are complaining of dollar scarcity and how they can raise letters of credit to import. The next set of questions comes from Nduka of the Nation, Nduka Chejina of the Nation. He says, there have been calls that the government should reopen the economy. What is the view of the CBN, given that the number of infections are still rising in Nigeria? I'm just reading as you said. And when will the supply of forex to PDs likely resume? Obi Nachima of This Day has these questions. How effective are the stimulus that the monetary authority has put in place?
How do we assess the fear of the global recession and how this will impact the Nigerian economy? I think it's important for us to know, if I may be repeating myself, that today the world is faced with unfortunate drop in crude prices and the COVID-19 pandemic that has resulted in almost 4 or 5 million infections all over the world, and I think infections running close to, deaths, right, rising close to almost about 400,000. This is a very unfortunate situation that has led, whether we like it or not, to a health crisis of unprecedented proportion, and indeed, after it, or even commingling with it at this time, economic crisis never seen before in global economic history. If you all notice, all economies are today affected. Is it the US? Is it the Euro? Developed economies, developing economies, frontier markets are all affected by this. To the extent that even in some economies, the US first quarter growth was negative of almost 4.9%. The EU also first quarter growth was a negative of almost about 3.9%. China suffered massive drop from double-digit growth to very low single-digit growth. All other major economies that the IMF at the meeting in October had predicted will help in accelerating and ensuring that growth is achieved during 2020, all have suffered unprecedented declines in output growth. I would say this, luckily, Nigeria, and pleasantly, this was a pleasant surprise, that Nigeria's first quarter growth came down from 2.5% during the fourth quarter to 1.87% during the first quarter of 2020. Perhaps understandable by virtue of the fact that we began to really lock down our economy in the month of March. Because we were already seeing some impressive growth trajectory, upward growth trajectory in the months of January and February, following the recovery that we had seen in 2019. So we saw what I could call a somewhat pleasant GDP of 1.87%. No doubt, because Nigerian economy, just like all the other global economies, have been shut down during the months of, in this case, April, May, substantially, and maybe to some extent also in June, we are almost certain that growth in the second quarter will be negative. But talking about how this will impact the Nigerian economy, let's all understand that the Nigerian economy is part of the global economy, so naturally we are impacted. But what is important is that to what extent are we able to manage this impact to see to it that we are, as quickly as possible, join others in getting out of the difficult situation. And that is what we all need to work together towards. And that's why we say that perhaps as we begin to see the easing of the lockdown and business begins to come back alive again, then we all need to move very, very aggressively and fast to see that economic activity is pushed to an extent where, if we are lucky, third quarter growth may come out positive and therefore return Nigeria back to a situation where we can say that we are not into a recession. There have been predictions, and understandably so, that just like the global economy will be in recession, that Nigeria will be in recession. But we think that as we ease the lockdown and we begin to take actions as quickly as possible to ensure that we move very fast out of the situation, get businesses back again, get the health sector back again, get our farmers to get back to the farm and go and conduct their farming and planting activities, we will be able to escape a recession. The second question says that we have read in some reports that Nigerian GDP will contract by almost 8%. How true, and what is CBN doing to ameliorate this impact on the Nigerian economy? Like I said earlier, yes, there are predictions that just like the global economy will slide into recession, there are predictions, because I call them predictions because they are forecasts, that Nigeria will also slide into a recession. But that if we, as quickly as possible, ease the lockdown, get the businesses back as quickly as possible, those who have suffered total destruction of their business, we make funds available to them in the health sector, in the small and medium enterprises, in the manufacturing sector, in the agri sector, make funds available to them as quickly as possible and at concessionary rates, and also give those even who have existing loans in the banks an opportunity to restructure their loans and push forward their repayments. Then it should be easy for us to get businesses back alive, so as to continue to accentuate increased production and so save our country from recession. So, like you all know, we put on the market 50 billion naira household and SME funds, out of which almost about 5 billion has so far been disbursed to almost 7,000 people. We also have a 100 billion health and pharmaceutical sector facility, out of which almost more than 10 billion has so far been disbursed, and we're hoping that more and more people will join. But notwithstanding this, the central bank has been in the market supporting manufacturers, particularly those who require priority items on matured letters of credit and bills, to make payment for their matured obligation. We've heard cases of people talking about opening of new LCs and the rest of them. Whereas we do not want to engage with them an argument as whether or not this is feasible. But our view is that at a time of lockdown, we wonder what fresh LCs are being opened at this time. And that is why sometimes we question the veracity in some of the information that people come to us to say that they are opening new LCs. But if you are talking about matured LC or maturing LCs or maturing FX obligations, the central bank has made itself available to fund these obligations. So there is no truth in anybody saying that there's FS scarcity to meet their maturing obligations, or even some of the so-called fresh LCs that people are opening, which we frown at this time, because I'm not going to pretend that I do not see, and I must say very clearly, I do not see the rationale in fresh LCs at this time when the global manufacturing chains are shut down. Okay? Now, Nduka of Nation says there have been calls that the government should reopen the economy. What is the view of the CBN given that the number of infections are still rising in Nigeria, and when will the supply of forex to BDCs resume? We do understand and appreciate that government must do what it must do, because government has a sole responsibility to fend and be attentive to the needs of its people. So as a result of this crisis, no doubt, and to avoid a situation where the infections spread very widely, government had to take a decision to lock down the economy. But we are happy that the PTF has advised government, and government has started a phased easing of this lockdown. But we are trying to say that we must be aggressive at this time, notwithstanding the fact that yes, the trend is still rising. Unfortunately, yes, the trend is rising. While we're trying to save lives, we must also save livelihoods. We must save livelihoods. One way to save livelihoods is that we must confront the fact that we must reopen the economy. We must get our farmers to go back to the farms. We must get the manufacturing plants back again, and we must begin to see the fumes coming out of the rooftops of these manufacturing companies. If we don't, the unprecedented unemployment that will face us, resulting from factories and manufacturing plant shutdowns, will be so unprecedented that we would have hurt so badly livelihoods that we thought we were going to protect, because we're saving lives as a result of the lockdown. That's what we're saying. That we must be aggressive and say we must reopen the economy, but at the same time, still take into consideration the protocols from our health officials. You all recall on BDC that at the beginning of the lockdown in March, the BDCs themselves, the association, wrote to the central bank to say that because they could not guarantee observing social distancing, and because they were afraid that there will be infections as a result of the processes put in place, and more importantly, the fact that they themselves were convinced that there are no more travels because almost all nations had shut their borders, that there was the need for the central bank to halt the sale of forex to the bureau de change operators. Central bank promptly complied and stopped. So what therefore would happen? As soon as the economic lockdown is eased, to the extent where we are saying that travels have resumed, borders have now been opened for travels to happen, certainly the BDCs will resume. We note some of the activities of some nefarious activities in the market, but we just smile because we know that anybody purchasing forex in that market today will begin to wonder the motive behind purchase of forex in the BDC market today. Why? If the BDCs are meant to substantially satisfy the needs of travelers, and there are no travels as a result of travel ban, then you and I can guess who the people are that are involved in nefarious activities buying dollars because they found some naira somewhere. That's all I want to say. Obinna, how effective are the stimulants that the monetary authorities has put in place? Like I read in the course of this presentation, we have provided a couple of stimulus packages, and companies have started, households and SMEs have started to access them. We would admit that the rate of access is low at this time, and we believe it is because of the lockdown. But that as the lockdown begins to be eased, certainly more and more people will apply for these facilities, and we should be able to make these funds available so that their businesses can immediately and aggressively take off. With the COVID-19, it is clear that Nigeria must now remain focused on diversification. What else will CBN do to achieve this goal? There is a saying. First, let me say that Nigeria has been talking about diversification for almost 50 years or more. That there's a need for us to move away from depending on oil and go to the agri sector, go to manufacturing sector to grow, to support our economy. We do not have any time more potent than now to do so. There's a saying that when an animal or a bushmeat in the bush begins to run very, very dangerously and aggressively, if you are a hunter, for you to kill that bushmeat, you must also approach it you must shoot it very dangerously and aggressively. Otherwise, you will not be able to catch that bushmeat or shoot it down. What am I saying? There is no other time but now for us to follow through, pursue the implementation of our policies on diversifying the economy. There is no other time than now. There is no other time than now that has been afforded us to reset the economy of Nigeria again. And that we must all work together to ensure that we do so. As a result of this pandemic, over 40 countries have banned the export of either drugs or goods out of their country. Nigeria has been lucky that 4 years ago, President Muhammadu Buhari told us to say, agri, CBN, let's go and let us launch rice program. Today, Nigeria is almost self-sufficient in production of its rice locally. Countries where rice are being exported have banned the export of their rice out of their country. To the extent that the price of rice in those countries have risen by as high as 70 to 80%. Because they themselves are running out of supply, out of production, because their farmers are all locked down at home. So what am I saying? Even countries that produce drugs have banned the export of their drugs. Nigeria is a country with 200 million people. Nigerians are very brilliant, smart, endowed people. I think the time is now that we should not just be talking about diversifying the economy, but that we must follow through to see to it that we go deeply towards implementation of all policies that government, monetary and fiscal authorities are putting in place to diversify the base of Nigerian economy. We do not have a choice but to do this. Are we expecting huge MPLs? We are not expecting huge MPLs. We are not expecting. You have seen MPLs have come down from over 12% last year to 6.58% today. Loans are being restructured, interest concessions are being granted, and I am so optimistic that the kind of support that has been provided not only to banks but also borrowers by the central bank is a good dispensation to keep them alive, be able to continue to work, to be able to pay back their loans as events unfold. I thank you all for your understanding.